thoughtful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Events, programs, and
Hello, and welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here for ACC's TV Dialogue Houston, we're here now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m. and Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, in the top of the hour, let me thank you for your calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired here on ACC TV Dialogue Houston, but particularly your great ideas for guests and topics and subjects to be covered on upcoming shows of Dialogue Houston. For after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show here on ACC TV. We have a great show planned for you today with someone who I've worked with and admire greatly for his leadership in our community and his willingness to tackle the hard issues and to address the hard issues. We're going to have a dialogue about how he sees 2021 going forward and how he sees our community being involved in the issues that we face here as Houstonians, but particularly with an eye on the issue of social justice. It is an interesting perspective in 2021 to look at how we've come out of 2020. I think we're all glad that 2021 is here, but we started the year off already with challenges to our unity, to our understanding of each other, to our learning to listen and actually hear each other, and to grow together as a community. Jaison has been involved in many, many projects in our city, in our community around not only education, but across the broad spectrum. He is the president of Edvents, which he'll tell you more about, I'm sure. So without further ado, let me just stop and say welcome to Jaison. It's so great to have you on Dialogue Houston.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, as we talked before we agreed to be on the air together with each other this afternoon, there are so many ways we could take this conversation. But let me just start with this. Give us kind of your perspective on where we are around this issue of, in Houston, of not so much polarization, but more efforts toward the unity, knowing that we have our issues that we still disagree on, knowing that we still have challenges ahead of us, which we can turn into opportunities to address some of the systemic things that are still needing to be addressed. But I'm hopeful. And when I use the word hopeful, this is my definition. Hope is not a state of mind, hope is a state of action. When I say I'm hopeful, that's what I mean. So I'm really trying to see where you see the lay of the land in this kind of context.
You know, I'm glad you asked that question, and I'm glad you brought up hope. There is an organizer named Miriam Kaba who says hope is a discipline, right? And so there's something that hope requires of us. So I think in this moment, to be hopeful requires us to be honest. And that is something that I think we're struggling with in this moment, right? How do we be really honest about what is required of us in this time? And then what are the threats and dangers that are facing us in this time as well? So that's really what I'm focused on. How do we strengthen our analysis and really think about what are the true dangers that we face in this moment? And how can we build the necessary tools so that we can fight them together if that is in fact what needs to happen. Sometimes unity is a challenge, and like in working toward unity, we end up pushing ourselves away from progress. And so I think for me, trying to identify and be clear about who are the people that I'm seeking to be unified with is especially important. And that is where I'm spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to create spaces to build our analysis and to build community with people that I do feel comfortable, or not necessarily comfortable, but do find common ground with.
I always think about unity as not uniformity, but I think about unity as the opportunity to really be creative and think outside of the box how to form that unity.
For sure.
And I think it allows such a broad space for all kinds of new ways to approach it, to even question, to pose the question, to ask the question behind the questions about, okay, how do we get there? What do we need to do to make you see at least a little pathway where we can have a little light that we both share and can see the pathway in that light? Because as you said, it takes work. It takes commitment.
For sure.
It takes accountability, and it takes work.
Hmm.
And I don't think most people are willing to work that hard.
And that's right. It's true. It's true. Most people aren't, right? Like everybody's not going to be fighting for change. We're invested in the status quo. That's what it means to be the status quo. We're invested in it. So people are going to have to give things up. There are sacrifices that are going to be made. We've talked about budget conversations, right? And
Right.
sometimes things can be a win-win, right? But oftentimes when you're talking about budgets, we don't have unlimited funds, right? When we're talking about many of the things going on in the city. So it's not necessarily a both and. Sometimes it's an either or. We have to confront that reality while also trying to grow the pot as well.
I think it's hard though to look at either or when we've been pushing for so long for both and. I think the honesty is an either or. It's not a win-win sum game. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. That's part of life. But I think when we come out of our status quo, I'm glad you used that word. Everybody has a different definition of my status quo. Status quo. You have yours, I have mine. The problem is we don't have one collectively together. And one of the things I love about Dr. Kleinberg and other demographers and other people who do this for a living is that the status quo is changing every day. Demographically, the status quo has already changed. Economically, it's changing. Racially, it's changing slowly. Criminal justice is changing slowly, but it's changing. So my status quo, yours, how do we get to our status quo?
What I'm excited about and what I'm seeing that I'm hopeful about is a change in language. We are being more intentional, more deliberate about our language around what the status quo means. So when we use words like equity, we've talked about this before, how equity can really be used and is being used to mean anything, right? Even things that are obviously harmful. You have people that are being forced to, like children that are being forced to go to school when we know that we're still in a pandemic, right? And being forced to take these standardized tests when we know that kids are facing all kinds of social emotional issues that are not being addressed. And we're putting that under the blanket and umbrella of equity. So having this language about what do these terms mean? Equity, patriarchy, right? What does justice really mean for different groups? What does the term intersectionality mean? And not in the sense of how people kind of use it to just mean it really any kind of multiple identities, but really multiple and interlocking systems of oppression, like Kimberly Crenshaw actually means in her work. And so as we engage with the real difficult work of coming up with these common understandings and pushing back when people try to misuse or just intentionally misinterpret these terms, then I think that moves us to a more common understanding.
I think you're right about the definitions. I do think we need new definitions. If our goal is to help form and change the narrative, if you change the narrative, therefore you change the story and you change the outcome. To change the narrative, it's going to take new words. It's going to take different words. It's going to take words that have common understanding, that we understand both the intent and the context and the text of that word.
Yes.
And I think that we have spent so much time not wanting, as you said, to take a step back. It is mindfulness. It is intentionality. It is all those things. But that causes us to have to pause in our great desire to move forward and to move quickly. What we really need to do is take a step backwards for a moment and take that pause and understand that pause gives us a way to look at things perhaps differently and to be more inclusive in that look. Mm-hmm. Because when the word that I've always tried to get people to really understand the full meaning of it is interdisciplinary. Mm-hmm. I think we need to pull together now from all the things we know, from every discipline we have, and do an interdisciplinary approach because it helps you see clearer all the aspects and elements that you must address, because they're all interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent of each other, and gives you a fuller picture, a fuller view. So I'm working from a clarity that I don't think we've had, nor have we been willing to take time to develop.
You know that I love that you brought up this idea of interdisciplinary. It brings me to think about a woman, Ruth Wilson Gilmore. Dr. Gilmore spoke at the University of Houston during their Eyes on Abolition series. And one thing that she said, and one thing that you'll hear kind of commonly brought up in these conversations around abolition, is to change something, we have to change everything, right? You also hear that in conversations around the Green New Deal, right? We can't change our energy system without changing everything. We can't make our city resilient, right? We can't make our city resilient and actually deal with the threat of the hurricanes and storms that can happen really any given year without changing everything. And so these things affect every single part of our lives. And we have to be honest about that and bold in our recommendations.
Do you think we're ready now, because of some of the recent current events, to rise to the occasion, to begin to do this work? Because it is work. Again, we said that twice now already. It is work. It is transparency. It is commitment. It is being be held accountable, and not to my commitments or your commitments to each other, to the commitments we bring to the table. Oftentimes I see people wanting to be at the table, but they're not willing to be at the table fully with their commitments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you're not willing to be fully at the table with your commitments, then it ends up always being a half or three-fourths conversation. We never, therefore, are able to get to the real issue, the real thing that's causing you to be hesitant. And I think that's something we have to teach people. It's okay. In fact, I want you to be at the table with your commitments and be passionate about it.
And with these conflicts that we have, right? That's what it means to be in relationship and in community with one another. We're going to have conflicts.
Yeah, but you just said the nasty, dirty word, though. Relationship.
Oh, a relationship. Okay.
Relationships are, I think, at the heart of all of this, and there's relationships that we're suffering from not having. I think we have taken for granted that we have tangential relationships that do not allow us to go deeper. We're finding that those relationships are very shallow. The relationships we need are those built on mutual trust and respect, where I can lovingly hold you accountable, lovingly call you out, lovingly call your BS when it's BS, lovingly do all those things. But because I have that relationship built on mutual trust and respect, I can do that. Because nothing happens without trust. Nothing happens without trust.
Yes, and we can't allow that we can't allow that to stop us from holding people accountable, right?
No,
if you're somebody in a position of authority or power, right? If you're an elected official who's given the authority to oversee aspects of how our city, our county, our community, right, operates.
Our state, our nation.
We don't, that's exact, our state, right, our nation. We don't have we may not have the time to develop the type of relationship of mutual trust and we're likely operating in a system that this entity that you represent, right, as somebody in a position of authority has already harmed a community that I'm a part of, right? If not harmed me in particular. So that is also something that we have to consider there. And to answer your question earlier, I think people are already doing this, right? People are already doing this work. You've got an eviction crisis that's happening. People are already doing the work to go out and give people the material resources that they need to stay housed and to stay fed and to take care of what they actually need, right? So people are doing that even when some of these people in positions of power are not. Even when the systems that we have come to rely on have been found to be deficient, or even when they're just not designed to serve those needs.
But we're coming out of an era. I agree with what you just said. But we're coming out of an era, nationally, statewide, and even locally in some ways, that good people have been silent about calling out what they know is wrong. Good people have been silent about evil. Good people have been silent about what happened with 45 in Washington, D.C.
I think you're being generous of calling them good people, but
okay. True. Good people define
people, right? People.
All right, people. How about people? But I use the word good only because when I talk to those people, they define themselves as good, and their reference for good, and this is what I was trying to get at.
Mm-hmm.
Their reference for good is that they all feel themselves to be wonderful Judeo-Christian people who would never do anything wrong or harm another human being. But my point to them is that you've let other people harm the people that you say you would never harm.
Right.
So because we have not made that connection for people, and there's a disconnect, and there's a disconnect in the congruency and in the alignment in the way we think, we feel, and we act. And
but
so,
I think you're being generous there, right? Because those connections
I'm
are also
a generous
being made.
person. I'm a generous person.
You are a generous person, but those connections are absolutely being made, right? It's not people. The fact that white supremacy is something that Joe Biden said, right? This is the first time somebody has kind of said it in a presidential inauguration. Does not change the fact. Does not right. And so it's also not a new concept to people. Now they're not used to having to engage and talk about it in their daily lives, but and they might have actively ignored it previously. But again, I think that kind of challenges, and people are being forced to reckon with what does it really mean to be a good person, especially in a system that isn't good in many ways, right? In a system that is functionally bad in so many ways.
It is the point, and you're right. It's helping and making us face some things we've not wanted to face. It's helping us to look at those things perhaps in a new light through different lenses. And I think the outcome of all of this will be, and it goes back to redefinition, even the definition of good. What is good?
Mm-hmm.
I go back to John Lewis, get into good trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Now we know
and
what
everybody loves to, everybody loves to say it, right? And then, peaceful protest gets thrown.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
It means whatever you decide it wants to mean, right?
Yeah, no peace, no justice. No justice, no peace. I mean, so what does that really mean to get involved enough to not only be an advocate, but to be a change agent, and to realize that to be a true change agent, there is so much that's impacted in those two words, that you have to really be willing to put your life out there, not as a risk to a danger of losing your life, but to put your life out there and be that spokesperson who shows up, stands up, and speaks up, and do all those things we know to do, that a small cadre throughout the history of this country have been willing to do. The larger group of human beings talk about doing. Mm-hmm. That small cadre who actually does the work.
And we're used to that, right? Like everybody knows group projects are notorious for functioning in this way. And we are a part of this one big group project of social change,
right? That
we're relying on a couple people to do the work, but we're all trying to get the credit.
But that little cadre is not enough anymore. So how do we expand? How do we expand those numbers? How do we, whatever you want to call it, train, educate, give people the skill sets, whatever the proper words are? Because I'm old enough to know, and have done this work all my life now, that the small cadre of passionate people today, circles you and I run in and other people like us run in, is not going to be enough to effectuate the change that we need. I need those allies. I need those partnerships. I need all the stuff we've been reading about in the last couple of years about, okay, if you're not being a non-racist is not enough. You have to be an anti-racist, all that stuff. That's good to say. Those words are wonderful. Everybody go read the book. And we come back with still, are you willing to make a commitment to do what it takes to become what you said you want to be and become? That's where we fall down. The human spirit is so content with being in their container, in their bubble of safety, in their silo, in their world, that to challenge any aspect of that is a personal attack, even when you do it lovingly. I have this thing I call holy guilt. Even when I approach someone with holy guilt and do it lovingly, they still come back at me as a personal attack.
Change,
I have a relationship with them.
Hard.
It is hard.
Change can be hard, right? Especially when
change is hard. That can be. Change is hard. The only
about changing these fundamental systems that we rely on every day, right? Yes, we want to talk about our like tech ecosystems and issues of diversity and actual exclusion and harm, right? There was Instacart, they were just talking about Instacart firing the employees that are trying to organize for better conditions.
Right.
It's like, well, okay, how willing am I to go out of my way to use another service to to learn about this harm that's being done to the person who's going to get my groceries, which many people have needed for a long time. Everybody can't walk over to the grocery store,
and
right?
today it's even not safe to go out.
Exactly. So if you're immunocompromised and you've got to make these, you've got to go and get your groceries, you need these services. But how do we make demands about of ourselves and about the world that we live in to ensure that we are being honest about the harm that's taking place? And we'll never know it all, right? But when we see it, we need to be clear about that and actually work to create some kind of change.
I used to think that education and awareness was enough. If I presented people who did not know because they lived in a different reality and different worldview and saw things through different lenses, if I at least presented them the other side of the other part of the story, and they give them the awareness and the skills, not the skills, the awareness and education, that they would move forward a little bit. I've learned that's not true. That's not true. That's why diversity training in corporations doesn't work. Sensitivity training doesn't work. It lasts it only lasts a few weeks and a few months.
It gives you some nice cover if you are a company that had some big issue with. It gives you some nice political cover, right? It gives you a good press conference. But as far as the people that you harmed,
right? Because the change of heart that needs to come out of all of this is really the question. And I'm beginning to realize that change of heart, that koinonia, if you will, has to come in a way that can be presented by the person they respect the most to listen and learn from.
You have to be in community, right? Anything.
Got to be in community, but it's got to be the right person in community.
Yeah, this is why anytime I'm getting involved with any kind of initiative, my first question is always, who are your people? Who is with you, right? If I'm looking at who I'm going to support in terms of people running for some position of authority, who are they listening to? Who are they going to for expertise?
Right.
Who is a part of this team that's going to make the decision when you need to go beyond, right? When Larry Payne is the main decision maker, who are the people that he has around him? And do I trust the network that he has around him? Because none of us can make these decisions alone.
Right.
So we need to be clear about who are our communities and who are our people. And for those of us that do consider ourselves progressive and do perhaps consider ourselves organizers, how do we create more spaces for people, more entry points, right? More on-ramps to get involved, because we need that as well. And not just the kind of standard, we're going to have an open forum and whoever comes. But no, how do we really create things with inclusion and participation in mind?
Yeah, open source is only good to a certain extent. The thing I've learned, and you touched on it, and it's interesting that you'd bring that up. Our networks are never inclusive as much as we think they are. And it's great, as sometimes we've made the effort to make it very more inclusive. There's always, I've learned. So there's always some voice, some aspect that I have missed and left out. Even with the best intentions of reaching out and trying to broaden that network, I'm finding more and more, because society is changing and demographic is changing and ages are changing and generations are changing, that it really is part of the work is to make sure you really have extended and broadened that network.
Especially well, if you wield any kind of power, which we all do in various situations. But if you're going to speak to an issue that affects a broad swath of our community, then yes, you do need to have ways to engage and meaningfully engage and learn from people from broad swaths of our community, for sure.
But Jaison, it used to be so easy. All I had to have was one black, one white, one woman.
Oh, we love it, right?
But now I have to have age and perspective and view. I gotta have all that stuff.
Gender, disability, right? Exactly. Sexuality, all of it. Right. We weren't even talking about these words publicly before, right? Some of these words were bad words.
Right. And as someone pointed out to me the other day, we're having a conversation. He really wants to learn. I have to give him credit. He's worked hard at learning what he doesn't know. He said, I thought I was trying to understand the gay community. I had LGBTQ down, whatever. But now I understand that the letters and alphabets I'm using all wrong because it's expanded. I don't know what the expanded version is. I don't know what it means, but I want to learn. I want to know.
And if you're not in community with people, then
right.
you
it's
have
outside
because
of his,
these
totally
things
outside.
change.
Right.
Because
totally
we
outside
all
of his
change.
Right. Totally outside of his spectrum.
The things.
And he doesn't want to be politically correct and use the right letters combined together. He wants to know the meaning behind those letters, which I give him credit for.
And I know you said like this person's not focused on being politically correct, but it's important to know, if your kind of focus is political correctness, then that's typically, for me, that's typically a sign that, okay, this person is not engaging in an authentic way, right? Like this is not a person that I necessarily want to be in conversation with. And we also need to be clear about protecting our time. For those of us that are trying to make change, there are a lot of people and a lot of initiatives that are going to waste our time.
Well, his revelation was one of his kids came home 3 Christmases ago and announced that they were gay at the Christmas dinner table. So he really now wants to know everything he can about the community, the broader, larger community.
That should be interesting. Those types of situations are always interesting to kind of see how they work out. I hope that I hope for his son's sake that has worked out well.
Well, his phrase he used, which I thought was interesting, he said, "My God would not want me to do anything but what I'm doing. He would be ashamed of me if I did not do it." So I said, okay, then if that's your motivation, then you will get it right.
Right.
But speaking of the motivation, that's really the challenge we have today, is what motivates us to be in or be out, to lean inward or to not be involved in the game at all. And I think that's the conversation we have to pick up another time, because believe it or not, we're running out of time. So I'm going to give you just a quick 30 seconds or so with closing comments, and tell us a little bit quickly about Edvents, and then we have to get out of here.
Yeah, I do a lot of educational programming. So I do a lot of work in the arts and education, organizing conferences and places for teachers and specifically Black educators to gather and learn and share ideas. But I also do a lot of cultural work around the city and organizing with the Imaginoir BLMHTX collective, trying to create opportunities for people to come together and learn about ways to advocate in the city, right? So we did a series of data analysis and visualization workshops to help people learn about like what is the data and what's really happening in our city, and be able to communicate that in meaningful and interesting ways.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, sir. We're going to have to continue this at another time. I really appreciate you being on this week. So in closing thoughts for me goes like this. Hope for the future, as we said, is not a state of mind, it's a state of action. Hope is a discipline, as Jaison pointed out. So here we find ourselves to be able to articulate our collective values and priorities for the future. How do we define a shared sense of purpose, the why? How do we help transform human beings and strengthen communities by providing opportunities to connect, grow, and inspire each other to do the right thing, to say the right thing, to be the right kind of human being we know we should, must, and ought to be, not for our sake alone, but for the community which we say we're part of. We provide essential information for growth and how to do this in a wonderful, safe, nurturing, crucible environment where people feel safe to articulate their individual thoughts, opinions, and perspectives, but not their own truth and not their own fact. There's only one truth and there's only one fact. So as we move forward for this year, 2021, with Dialogue Houston, we're going to have guests that will help us to broaden our perspective and horizon and thinking around these issues. We're so glad to have you join us for this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. We look forward to you being part of us as we go forward. Until then, as always, be safe, be well, and peace, power, and love.